Let's go. Scenario 1. Product vision, check. Business impact, check. Success measures, check.
Effective architecture, check. Scalability and robustness, check. Metrics and monitoring, check.
Not sure about this product, but I think a 2% lift would help. Ooh, a Chalet prior is what we need. Is this good for an ICML or KDD paper?
Data scientists navel-gazing in a corner. Who's seen that? Come on, be honest. And not at your own current company, of course. OK, so about 20%. Lower than expected, but OK.
All right. Scenario 2. Product vision, check. Business impact, check. Success measures, check.
Rapid experimentation, check. Simple models first, check. Right metrics, check.
So let's write a new streaming framework for this weekly dashboard. I think that's a good idea. We're not meeting our SLAs, but you know what? We need a faster JSON parser. I think that's going to do the trick because that's the bottleneck, clearly, right? And we'll write it in Clojure, maybe, or Scala. So let's write an optimized distributed graph database for our data scientist. So she's going to love that. I'm sure it's going to be useful.
Engineers reinventing the tech wheel? Who's seen that before? Oh, yeah. All right. Scene 3.
All right. Effective architecture, check. Scalability and robustness, check. Metrics and monitoring, check.
Rapid experimentation, check. Simple models first, check. Right metrics, check.
Forget A/B testing. My gut tells me that this is the way to go. Business impact, who cares? Let's build it anyway. No time to instrument. Let's just go to market and we'll figure that out. I'm sure the numbers will look good.
Product in a bubble, who's seen that?
All right, so most of us in this room work with data. We build data products, data platforms. We analyze data sets and so on and so forth. That's what we do, right? So Anu, Jonathan, and myself have worked together in this field for quite some time. And just to give you a sense, we co-founded a startup together around data. We worked with over a couple dozen companies and interacted with definitely more than 100 companies on data products in particular. And now we get a chance to work with incredible data across Intuit and its 60-plus products, Mint, TurboTax, Quicken, QuickBooks, and so on and so forth. So we've seen a lot. We've seen a lot in the way of how to build data teams, how others do it, and how we do it, how to think about data products, and then how to choose technologies and architectures, and so on and so forth. So naturally, we thought we'd come to Strata and share a couple of things with you. One is kind of what worked for us, and it may not be generally applicable, but what worked for us. The second thing is patterns and observations that we've seen out there in the wild.
OK, so for those of you who watch Star Trek, you know that Planet Risa is the place to be. And for those of you who don't, we have a handy analogy down there. So in all our time working together, we observed a lot of patterns. We noticed a lot of different ways that companies work together. And so we've come up with a 3-step process on how to make it happen to go to Planet Risa and build data products.
All right, so the first thing is, should come to no surprise, it's to build an awesome team, right? We all know that's at the core of it. So what is an awesome team? What do we think is an awesome team? We're not talking about specifically a product team, an engineering team, a data science team, and an analytics team. We're talking about a joint team, and we want to do that cohesively. So when we think about it, we're thinking, what are the qualities that we would like in our team, in ourselves and in the team we're putting together? So the first quality is not actually what you would expect, is great communication skills. That's the first one, right? And the reason for that is you can be technically amazing, but if you sit in a corner and you do your thing, you may be doing the wrong thing. So we want to avoid things where I'm looking over your shoulder, you're looking over my shoulder. Did they understand what I'm talking about? Will they build the right thing, and so on? So that's the first thing, great communication skills. The second thing is people who are nice to work with, right? You want to come to work every day and think, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to get to interact with so many amazing people. So no asshole policy. That's the second thing. So we haven't even got to, now we're getting to the technical part. So the third thing is they have to be technically amazing, right? In their own field. And that means that you want to see a spark, no pun intended, around kind of something they've done in the past to show expertise and the fact that they can become an expert in some area related to what you're doing. However, that does not mean that they absolutely must have specific technologies that you happen to work with at that current time. So for example, if they don't know Spark, or if they don't know Kafka, if they don't know R or Pandas or whatever, we would not fail a candidate just because of that. So that's something that we care about. More important are critical thinking, problem-solving skills, interest and aptitude for learning and being nimble and iterating for themselves and for the team. And of course, having very strong fundamentals in their own area. That's very important. Also, part of building an awesome team, never settle. Never settle. So for us, this means it's worth it for us, and it's happened in the past where you can wait 6 months, 9 months for that one amazing person. And it's so worth it not to hire the 10, reasonably good product people, engineers, data scientists, and analysts. It's not worth it, right? It's far better to wait and suffer a little bit until you get that awesome person, and then they're going to unlock things that you weren't even thinking. So never settle. Another thing that is critical for us is finding the right mix. And we're showing you here a simple graph, 3 dimensions, engineering, data science, and product. And this is kind of how we're thinking about it. And we can go deeper during the question and answer time. But for now, the idea is that we want everybody we hire to be good in 3 areas and have product thinking and product understanding, see the big picture, be good from a technical, on the technical side. So, understand engineering and understand data science and so on. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. Now, this is actually a little bit different than what we've heard out there in the sense that you're thinking, okay, so I'm going to need to put together a good team. So I'm going to get the JavaScript gal, who's absolutely amazing, and that's all she does. We're going to get the ETL guy, and maybe they know they can do things in real time, but who knows? And then we're going to get the traditional product person because they know how to drive things, and it's going to be amazing, right? So we don't think that works. At least that doesn't work for us. So here's what works for us. We want to have kind of high constraints, a high bar. So good, good, and good in all 3 dimensions. And then an amazing product person for us would be great at product. They would actually be very technical, so they would understand data science and they would understand engineering. Very tough to find, but if you do find that person, it's absolutely amazing. Also, in terms of engineering, you want an engineer who's absolutely amazing at engineering. Again, not at specific technologies. We care less about that. We've hired people in the past who didn't know anything, for example, about Hadoop, Kafka, and things like that. And because they were great, in 2 weeks they were good. In 3 months they were actually mini experts, and in 6 months they would teach you whatever you need to know. But they also have to have very good product sense, and they also have to understand how to run a predictive model, how things work under the hood, right? And finally, data scientists. Data scientists, similar thread, similar idea. They have to be great at what they do. We don't want the research scientists who tweak a model between 90 to 91%, right? We want, because we've all seen that, right? But we want somebody who's really applied, who's a great data scientist in their own right, and then be actually very good on the product side and very good on the engineering side. So people we've hired in the past, for example, as data scientists, even though the role was data scientist, you could have actually hired them as junior engineers because they're that good, or product managers. All right, so now the fun starts. Now that we have the right people, the right team, the right mix of skills and the right talent, what do? So let's say we have a data product that we need to put together and we need to build. So rather than taking that and just assigning it to 1 or more teams, depending on what you've seen before, that is a pre-existing, predetermined, predefined team, just because it's there, what we're thinking is, why not get the right people on the problem? So the way we're thinking about it is put together these pods that could be something like a product manager, a couple of engineers, 3 engineers, a data scientist, an analyst, whatever the right mix may be for that particular problem, and do it on demand, and just say, these are the right people to solve it. So just to give you a couple of examples from our world right now, let's say we have a business search problem that we need to solve, right? So in this case, for example, we would put together a pod with the right people, a product manager, 4 engineers, an analyst, and a data scientist, because that's the right team to solve the problem, we believe. And then you can do the same things for a few other examples. For example, at Intuit, we have a real-time commerce graph, and you can put a pod around that. We have, I think, 25+% of the GDP flowing through Intuit. Personalization recommendation, that's also fascinating data. Real-time data capture and stream processing, and so on and so forth. So putting together these pods makes sense for us, and it's important to do that rather than sticking with what currently exists. So now that we have the right team, we have the right skill sets, the right talent, and we actually put together these pods, what are we going to do, right? So we're going to definitely encourage the people participating in those pods to blur the boundaries, right? So just the fact that on paper or on LinkedIn, they're called a product manager or a data scientist or an engineer doesn't mean that's all they have to do, right? So theoretically, in startups, this is basically what happens. You have a problem that you need to solve, and then you get everybody in a room, and you say, okay, everybody pick whatever you need to pick from the things that we need to do, and just go ahead with it. And that happens actually much better if there's overlap in terms of skill sets and in terms of ability. And by ensuring kind of high constraints, we make sure that's possible. And that can apply not only to startups, it can apply to large companies as well. That's what we found. So okay, so now we have an awesome team.
Now, it's really important to solve a big problem. So all of us like to build things because we like to solve problems. But it's so very important to make sure that you're solving the right problems. So how do you identify a big problem and the right problem to solve? You want to pick a problem that really impacts your customers and one that you and your team are uniquely positioned to solve. And that's what makes for a big, important, right problem. For a lot of us, thinking about big problems is a little bit daunting because you might think, okay, well, I'm going to solve a big problem and I'm going to go off and work on it for a year and emerge with a solution. What's better is to actually have a big vision, something that's meaningful for the team, chunk it up into bite-sized chunks that you can actually deliver value on incrementally, and work on it that way so that you're solving a big problem, but you're not trying to solve it all at once. Once you've identified the right problem to solve, it's equally important to make sure that you're keeping score by tracking the right metrics. And tracking metrics is really hard. It's one of the hardest things you can do. But the reason that it really helps is having the right metrics in place really helps to empower the team. So for us, as we work in pods, it's so very important for the pods to have the right metrics in place so that they know if they're tracking in the right directions, and it empowers them to be able to make decisions so that we're not constantly looking over their shoulders to say, hey, go this way, go that way, make this decision, make that decision. So for the pods especially, if you're going to empower them and you're going to embolden them to own their own outcomes, it's so very important to have the right metrics in place. But as I said, it's hard, and it's possibly one of the hardest things that you can do. So how do you make sure that you're doing it right? You pivot, you iterate, you change. You do it quickly, and you do it as often as needed. And you do it both for trying to figure out whether you're solving the right problem and for figuring out if you're tracking it in the right way or you're assessing it in the right way. So for example, when we work in pods, we actually set up the pods for what we call an epoch. And an epoch lasts for a quarter, about 13 weeks. And that gives us the opportunity to, every 13 weeks, assess whether we're continuing to solve the right problems for our customers and look at the metrics and see if we're actually making the right progress towards these goals. So for the big projects that we have, the way we set it up is that we'll chunk up the project into these quarterly epochs, and then we'll form pods around the projects, around those products. And so each large project may have a set of related pods around that project. Having the right metrics allows these related pods to make sure that if there are dependencies, that people can actually make sure that they're tracking because they've got the right metrics in place. And it allows for fast iteration, because then it's not like a year from now we're going to suddenly emerge with the right answer. Every quarter we're able to reassess, are we solving the right problems? Are we measuring them in the right way? And we have to make sure that we're not afraid to start or stop or change how we're doing things based on what we're seeing, based on the data that we're seeing. And the reason that this kind of iteration helps to move things quicker, and the reason that it's important to do it in the context of a pod, is that imagine if you had you had 3 months to design a product, and you had all of your product managers go off and design something, and then come back 2 months later with the perfect design where they shared with the engineering team and said, go build this in the next month, and the engineers would be like, no, and the data scientist would be like, you didn't even ask for my input. That would be slow. Versus if you actually, at the start of each epoch, start the pod with data scientists, product managers, engineers together in place, and then hit go, there'd be much more opportunity to rapidly iterate during the quarter, during that epoch, and more opportunity to iterate throughout the course of the project. And now, once you've done that, here's step 3.
So once you have assembled an awesome team and put them in the right environment, and you've identified a big, important problem that you are uniquely positioned to solve, one of the best things that you can do is get out of the way. You have to trust the team and let them become the experts in that area. Specifically, you might have expertise that you have, that you've hired, but oftentimes you can grow it. You want to enable your team to learn and grow, and then take that expertise that starts to just naturally emerge within the pods and allow it to cross-pollinate into other pods. So for example, with like the real-time commerce graph, you might have graph experts who are become experts in graph, and then you can take that expertise and apply it to fraud detection. Or for example, as we develop push down automation, in one area, let that kind of percolate to all the other pods as we kind of do cross-pollination of the members of the pods. I think the key thing is really that the expertise really can grow, especially when the team is trusted and they're just off doing their amazing work together as a team. Another really important point is that you really want to have a setup where you completely trust the team and anyone can represent the team. It's really not sort of like, oh, I'm the boss and I am going to speak for the group. And first of all, that just slows down like all the meetings that you need to have. But it's really let the product manager or let the product manager actually do some debugging, or have the data scientists or the analysts actually talk directly to customers, or the engineer actually can do a lot of interfacing with other product groups, if you will. So really having this sort of blended group allows people to feel shared ownership and also get to experience a lot of different aspects of working within a team. And then in addition, so if you are, let's say, the manager, really what's your role then? You're not, you're sort of, how can you best help this culture emerge, and how can you best make things move along fast? Really think of yourself as sort of the VC investor. You're the PR firm. You're also doing even BD. And so you're not like the boss. There isn't necessarily, and also there's also not necessarily like a kind of front office, back office. It's really you're just trying to be the advocate for the team, letting the team go off and do the things that they need to do, and then ensuring that the right things happen, the right cross-pollination happens, or that you help make the right connections to the right groups that where you need to have those connections emerge. So if you have all that and it's going well, you then can set course and engage.
So if you remember nothing else from your time here, remember these 3 things. Build an awesome team, solve a big problem, and get out of the way. Simple, right? This is hard. And we want to let you know we've done this for years, and we know this is very, very hard. And for most companies, they're not there yet. So in all of our time working together, we've seen a lot of different patterns. We've made a lot of observations of ways in which different companies handle building data products. And so we'll share a couple of examples with you to share these patterns so that you can apply them and see where the different pieces do or do not fit together.
All right, so the first example is a multinational banking company, a financial services company, and that we've interacted with. So this is not completely fictional. So the way they were approaching the problem is they took a technology-first approach, right? So they said, well, we have a lot of data, quite a lot of it, so then we need to do something with it. And everybody's talking about Hadoop and all the wonderful things. So this was a few years back, right? So we need to do the same thing. So they decided, okay, because everybody's talking about it, and they said we should do this, we're going to build one or maybe more Hadoop clusters, right? And magic is going to happen. Well, not quite, right? So they were very early in their journey on the product. So they didn't have at the time product vision. But they had amazing data, just tremendous data and amazing possibilities. They had a treasure trove of data that most of the companies don't have. And they were just starting to think about leveraging it, but they were not there yet. And they were also not connected to the business itself, right? So they had a whole bunch of customers, I think in the millions, right? And the idea was that they weren't talking to the business side to see what are the problems that we need to solve, right? They were just saying, well, I have data, so I'm going to build a Hadoop cluster. And they didn't have any data science at the time. So if you look on the right-hand side, you have basically the kind of what we think of it as the kind of the team state at the time. They had pretty good engineering. They didn't have much in the way of product, and they didn't have any data science. And if we jot things down on a piece of paper, basically what we have here, and you start thinking through the lens that we've just discussed, right? Like the team, the big problem, and engage, right? We basically have to look at this from the following perspective. So they didn't have at the time an awesome team, right? They could have built it. They had good engineering, but didn't have data science or product. So that was one thing. They could have solved the big problem. They were starting to kind of touch it, right? But they didn't have the product vision, so they weren't there yet. But we could see and they could see to some extent kind of the value of it. And then because they didn't have the product vision and the team was not quite there yet, they just didn't even know where to start. So that's kind of one example to share with you to see how we can apply this lens to a real life example.
So another company that we saw was a large media company. They had an excellent engineering team, and I mean excellent, one of the most amazing engineering teams. They had a good product team, but it wasn't data-driven. They had really great metrics because their engineering team had built a really solid metrics foundation and the beginnings of data science. They didn't iterate quickly, and the product and the data side were too decoupled. And unfortunately, because the product team wasn't really in touch with the data, what happened was that the team wasn't really solving the big important problems for their customers that they could have been solving. And instead, the engineering team was off building really cool things, really interesting things, but not building the things that would have really impacted their customers' lives. So looking at our framework, their engineering was off the charts amazing. Their product was good, but not very data-driven. And the data science, in this case, was tiny. And so as a result, what ended up happening was, although some parts of the team were totally awesome, they weren't solving the big, important problems that they were so uniquely positioned to solve. And they weren't able to iterate quickly to actually narrow in on those problems and solve them. But they had a great foundation in place. The leadership team was really great at letting the team do their thing. So they had a really great foundation in place where they could engage if they got the other parts of the mix right.
This third example is a large advertising firm. So they had a very data-driven product team, quite strong. But ultimately, partially because of a lack of data science, they really lacked they had a limited vision of what's possible with the data that they're amassing. The engineering team was really not product focused. They were just sort of taking the requirements from the product team and then going and building it. And they really then could not iterate quickly in the way that they were thinking about it. And again, as I mentioned, the data science was really just not existent, which I think ultimately limited the vision of what you could go do. And so in this framework, again, if you look at it, you see very strong product. The engineering team, while very strong, I would say very strong skill sets and individuals, just the way they were set up, putting the team in a lens, it would be sort of more okay in the way they're operating. And again, the data science was really tiny. And so when you actually put it all together, I would say the team was not really set up as an awesome team at the time. They weren't solving the really big, awesome, unique problem that they were set up to solve that would help them go, like a really, big, massive thing that would help them take to the next level. And therefore, there really wasn't, like liftoff. They weren't getting to, even warp 1.
All right, so it wouldn't be fair if we didn't turn the same eye, the lens to ourselves, and really kind of understand what we're doing well, what we're not, right? What are the opportunities for us to improve in? And we want to do this, right? When we're doing it, it's not just for the presentation. So the first thing is really the team again, right? so far, we've built and continue to build an awesome team with data science and analytics, product engineering working together and having fun while we're doing it, right? However, it's easy to put together a team, which is actually pretty good, but it's very difficult to put together a team that is absolutely amazing. You're wondering every day, it's wondrous when you go to work every day and saying, oh my God, I'm working with all these people. I cannot wait to learn from them. So that's the first thing that we're doing.
So we're definitely solving hard problems. We've got 25% of the GDP flowing through our products at Intuit. We've got 50 million users of our products whose financial lives we can affect very, very profoundly. And it would be easy for us to say, we've decided that these are the problems we're going to solve and sort of hit go and iterate a little bit and do incremental work. But what we have to make sure that we're constantly doing is reassessing, looking at ourselves to make sure that we continue to solve those problems that we are so uniquely positioned to solve, and to make sure that we're not solving solved problems.
So we have a lot of good metrics in place, but it's not really across the board yet. And so because of that, it's extremely hard. It's really hard to get these metrics in place, and because of that, we're not completely at the stage of being like 100% eyes on and hands off. But I think we're going definitely in the right trajectory, and I think the opportunity for what data and data science can enable for our customers is profound. And so I would say in summary, everything is kind of going in the right trajectory. We're building an awesome team. We have really meaningful problems that we're solving. How can we transform the lives of small businesses? How can we transform the lives of individuals? How can we actually get more money in people's pockets? And the opportunity to do that through data science and through amazing engineering, I think, is there. And so I think we're starting to see more and more capabilities that enable us to just get a lot more engagement across the team. And really lead to the next wave of data products in the financial world for individuals and small businesses.
So, as I said, if you remember nothing else, remember these three things: build an awesome team, solve a big problem, and get out of the way. And before you know it, you'll be on planet Risa, drinking, frolicking, building data products.
All right, so this is how all the pieces, we think, fit together. Thank you for coming here and attending this talk, and we're opening it up for questions.
Can you elaborate on get out of the way? Are you referring to the micromanagement, or they're basically trusting the team, or letting the team basically be cohesive and deliver? Can you elaborate on that one?
Sure.
So the question was elaborating on what we mean by getting out of the way. So I think a lot of traditional setups in companies are often like, okay, here's here are the priorities, and you go execute on it, and let me check how you're doing, and let me tell you what to do, and let me tell you how to do it. But when you set things up that way, I think you end up creating a culture where there's constantly a lack of, sometimes it almost can be too much, where there's a lack of trust, and the team doesn't feel like they can make any decisions. So ultimately, you want the group to make the decisions on their own and let them do the amazing stuff. And when they're doing that, everyone's engaged, everyone's doing amazing work. You definitely have to have the team come up with the metrics so they know how to hold themselves accountable. But it's really about empowering them to make decisions.
So how many people think they're a micromanager? Nobody, right? And that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no one would even realize that they're standing in the way of their teams, because nobody thinks of themselves as, oh, I'm over-managing the team. And so it really is about making sure that you have the thing in place, the pod in place, so that the pod has the full ownership, they've got the right skill set, they've got more expertise than you do in whatever it is that they're working on. And then realizing that they're the ones who own this, not you as the manager, so that you're not standing in their way, and you're not forcing them to come to you for every decision, and you're not forcing them to rely on you. You could be gone, and they still have the full ownership, the full autonomy, the full empowerment to make things happen.
That's right. So one of the things is decoupling and removing dependencies, right? So by actually having the pod be there from the beginning, you basically ask them, okay, can you go figure out the problem? And it's not just the product team going to do that, right? Figure out what are some possible solutions. Again, everybody is in there figuring it out. And then pitch it to us, right, everybody, and then get thumbs up, get suggestions, iterate, and then actually go do it. So it's not different teams with different goals and agendas. It's that one team that you put together, that one pod, and you trust them. So great question. So what do you do when a pod starts failing? Actually, this is normal. So first of all, we've been iterating ourselves over this, right? We didn't come up with like a magic thing that just works, and we're still continuing to do that. Everything around communication, setup, you name it. So pods do fail, but the idea is to fail fast, obviously, and the idea is that you have every 3 months you essentially have the opportunity to reevaluate. During the 3 months, of course, you basically can participate to informal demos, really get a pulse on it. But really, you have to let the team figure it out, right? And after 3 months, you figure out we haven't given them the right problem to solve. We haven't set them on the right track. Maybe it's not the right mix of people. We need to amplify, shut down the project completely. But then you have that option, as opposed to saying, okay, hey, pre-existing team, take on this project. You've got a year to solve it, go. And then product team and engineering and data science are pulling in different directions.
Actually, just to add, like, yeah, there are. I would say that even during that time, it's not that you don't interact. So, you as a coach, if you will, you might actually attend sort of a weekly informal demo where you can give feedback. And really, there's an opportunity to ask questions. And oftentimes, asking the right questions can get the team to think differently and operate differently. So you can actually get them to change how they're doing things. But yeah, really, but basically, it's kind of let things go for 13 weeks, but and there is some course correction. I think I'd also like to add, the team actually may be doing great. They may be doing awesome, but there's externalities that are reality. It may be that they're building something, and then, a new open source project comes along, which is 10x better than what that team could ever build, even in a year. And therefore, you say, okay, we shut that down. We have to course correct. We say, okay, it's good they were doing this. Let's stop what we're doing and let's adopt what's already out there in the community.
And also to add to the 13-week period, if you have the right metrics, and having the right metrics is hard, right? It's very easy to have metrics. People have metrics overload, but having the right metrics would actually allow you to keep your eyes on what is happening with the pod, so that it's not that at the end of the 13 weeks you're like, oh my God, this project has failed and I have no idea how this happened.
I would also say it brings up an interesting point that failure is okay, and failure is actually pretty healthy, right? So most things fail, first quite a few times before you get it right? So even if you know exactly how to do things, it would even be better to let the team figure it out. They may come up with things that will surprise you, and they may fail, but they will learn from that. And if you iterate quickly enough, failure is a great thing.
So ideally, we'd like to have pods that are 6 to 8 is about a good size. Sometimes it ends up happening because we have either very complex projects or perhaps a shortage of people with certain skills, that we end up having pods that are a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller depending on the size of the project. Maybe a smaller project might need 4 people. And ideally, each person in the team is on one pod. So they're not feeling the pull in 2 different directions. And each pod is really totally focused on the problem that they're trying to solve. So it's not like, I have to split some of my time here and some of my time there, and then you can't really focus.
One is this presentation in the context of engineering manager, or what is the role of engineering manager? And second question is, sometimes in some organizations, at least the one that I'm in, data science is service. So we serve the one-off questions or one-off challenges that other teams have. Can this type of approach work in the context of the culture?
So I'll take a first stab at this, right? So I think if we're blurring the boundaries, right, we typically don't just pull the card of, hey, I'm a VP, I'm a director, I'm a manager, do what I tell you, right? So that should be non-existent, right? It should be kind of peers trying to solve problems, right? So you can think of it as, you as, let's say, a manager, you would think of, okay, what are the problems we need to solve? And you can think of it from that perspective, but it's really for everybody to have that kind of mindset that this is what we do. We have some problems that we have to figure out. We come together. I'm going to express my preferences. You're going to express yours. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to go do it, right? So I think that's the more important thing. And the ability to speak up, and as an engineer, for example, question, suggest, and do other things around product or even data science, I think that's great. And also on the data science side, I think it's more than they have to be at the table, right? And you're right that I think many data science teams can be or are perceived as professional services. But then the trick is, how do you actually take that and say, we're building some concrete things, and can we have impact on the product and not do one-offs?
And I think by blurring, you also get a sense of really shared ownership. So you want people who are doing data science analytics to actually help with QA, because they actually are often well positioned to help with QA sometimes. And so if you have really kind of totally segmented roles and responsibilities, there ends up being a lot more blaming each other for things that don't go well. And so in that regard, that's why we like to blend things. We have the data scientists even sometimes doing a lot of engineering work, doing integration tests and so forth. So I mean, it may not be how it's set up in your company, but maybe instilling a little bit of that could help, I think, get people to also even understand the other person's role and understand what are the things that they see and they face. And
also in terms of being a services organization, we've definitely seen different companies who've had that kind of model where data science ends up being kind of a services or a body shop even, where people will be like working on some product and they'll say, I need a data scientist to run some reports or analyze my data, and they'll sort of pull them in. But instead what we're doing is we actually, again, go back to this pod model, and we have the pods engage with the product. So it's not sort of this body shop where it's like throw a data scientist into some product, middle of the road, where the data scientist has no input beyond just having to crunch numbers. So even for the data scientists, as they work with product teams, it's in a pod, and from being in a pod, you actually get great critical mass. So it's not sort of this idea of one person, in the back office crunching numbers. You've actually got a pod that can work in partnership with the product team. And so it's not the services model or this kind of body shop model.
From your experience and experimentation, what are some of the metrics that you're using to measure the progress that you're seeing for each of these categories: product, engineering, and data science? What are some of the things that you look at to figure out besides I think you had mentioned the bi-weekly demo piece? Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent question.
Yeah. I think it varies. Definitely, it varies across different products, right, and different projects. That's for sure. But more recently, in the last couple of epochs, for example, we try to set clear goals. Sometimes we fail and we learn, but try to set clear goals in terms of the product. What are they going to actually achieve, right? Also in terms of engineering, we're here. We've made great progress, but we need to be here. What are the things that need to happen for us to have, for example, let's say we don't have a push button deployment, right? That's on the engineering side, or we don't have certain features that the clients are asking for. So in the beginning of the epoch, as we call it, we kind of we set those goals, and then we keep asking the same questions again and again. And then, of course, right after setting the goals, then we say, okay, what are the specific metrics for that project that we need to put in place? And we're trying to stay away from vanity metrics, such as how many calls of any kind have you received, even though it doesn't make sense. But we're trying to be much more driven in terms of adoption, in terms of response time for various services that we have, real-time services, and so on.
I think an important point is it's you have to start somewhere. So if you can't if you don't measure it, you can't fix it, right? And then also, I think sometimes there's a tendency for people to say, well, here are the metrics, and we're going to track these for the next 3 years. It's really, let's just start with some metrics, but let's quickly iterate on those metrics as we realize what they don't solve for. So in the context of like an internet website, for instance, you might measure, well, how many page views are there? And that's maybe not the right metric, because if you improve search, let's say on that system, search might actually get better, which drives page views down because people are not spending as much time refining their searches. And so, then and they actually leave your site, after they find their search, if you're a Google or LinkedIn, for instance. And so then the better metric would be, well, how often do they kind of continue to reuse and rethink of using your service? And so that's how you would maybe think through the evolution in that context. And that's what we try to apply even within the pods for measuring things like how they're performing on SLAs, or how is the service performing in terms of search results and so forth. And
in terms of, say, for an example of how to measure an awesome team, right? If you look at our framework, that's a really tough one to measure, in some sort of way. Do we have an awesome team? And for the pods, what we have as a measure is a happiness metric. So at the end of each sprint, the pods take a pulse amongst themselves, anonymous poll where they measure the level of happiness for the pod. And so that's an example of a metric where we can look at, if the project's not well defined or something else is happening, we can track happiness as the pod defines it. And so it's things like that. It doesn't have to be complicated, automated metrics. It just has to be something that you feel like you can do quickly, reproducibly, and so on.
How do you see this scaling? The idea of an audit is a really cool idea from a management perspective. That's number one question. I think the one that I bring with me here is design. And especially data product, if they get caught, if they get challenged, how do you communicate with the consumer in a very effective way? And I see that design is the design that better with the product engineering. And I see that in what are you talking about?
So the two questions were, I think, scaling, for example, a data science team, right? Especially if they're viewed as a professional service organization. And then the second question was, design may be missing from here, right?
I'll take a stab at the first one. So I think you heard us talk about how we like the expertise to grow and we like people to learn. So we really have a growth mindset that we try to instill in our culture. And so in that regard, we want people to pick up skills. And so you could have your data scientists, you have your 6 data scientists, you said, over 100 engineers, if I heard correctly. And so I'm sure there's a lot of people in that engineering camp who could pick up a lot of the data science skills. So effectively, have the data scientists teach everybody. Their responsibility is to teach data thinking, to teach data science techniques, and that way you get much more of it going throughout the company. I think that's probably the most fastest route that you could deploy to scale things.
I would say that I bet that if you think about the things that the data scientists do in the professional service context, right, they're going to do a lot of the same things over and over and over again, right? I bet that's the case. I run an analytics organization, so I've seen that. So I think one of the problems is that if they're not paired up with product and engineering, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to say, we're not going to do this, or we're going to do it, and then we're going to productize it. Right? That's going to be key, so they don't have to do the same things over and over again. It may be semi-automation, it can be full automation, but I think that's one of the ways. That's probably the way that you dig yourself out of that thing. Otherwise, you're going to try to scale by adding more bodies, and that's possibly not a good way to do it.
I think we should emphasize. So the thought on the second thought was like we really focused in this talk around the coupling of product engineering and data science, but in reality, in our group, we actually have other functions. So we have QA, governance, and we do have design. And so those groups are also represented in our pod. So we have them, we just didn't really cover them in a lot of detail.
We have DevOps as well,
yeah.
And because of the financial services aspect, we have data governance as well, which is really key.
Program management across pods. So there are a lot of different functions. In some cases, it makes sense for that function to focus exclusively on a pod. And in the case of, say, program management, sometimes it makes sense for them to focus across pods. So some functions, it actually makes sense to have them be part of the pod. And in some cases, it makes sense for them to be working across pods. Design, for example, we'd like to be in a position where we have a designer for every pod. But because we have a much smaller team of designers, design actually ends up being split often across pods, but it actually works out pretty well because design is one of those things where they need to get ahead of the development team sometimes, and so they can be working in a pod where they actually are there for the initial stages, get ahead of the development team, move to another pod where then they can get ahead of that development team and so on. So it doesn't have to be sort of a hard and fast rule that everyone is in that pod for the entire epoch. It depends on the function. QE, for example, sometimes it makes sense for them to be across pods that are related. Sometimes if there's something that we're in the stage of building and launching, it makes sense for QE to be fully part of that pod 100% of the time.
So the question, well, go ahead.
So it's the question is, in an existing organization, how do you introduce this? And in an organization where you may have people coming or going, how do you make it work? So the first question, we're definitely in a position to answer because when we started at Intuit, this didn't exist. So it was an existing organization where we didn't have pods. And we started it in the way you would start any experiment. We started it small. We had some metrics in place to measure whether it would work. So we started small with probably a third of the organization in pods so we had a couple of pods. I think we had like 5 or 6 pods. And we said, this is going to be an experiment. We'll have these small pods, and we're going to track certain metrics to see whether this experiment is going to be a success or not. And so you can start small. You can start with 3 pods, 5 pods, whatever, and just treat it as an experiment. Treat it with any kind of in any kind of scientific way where you would say, okay, I'm going to have this experiment. I have some hypotheses. I'm going to test it. I'm going to measure the success and go from there.
For your second question, how do you deal with people leaving and coming and leaving? I was going to say just make them leave and come on the first day of the epoch, and you're set. But so the reality is these things are going to happen, right? So there are going to be some hiccups, some adjustments. That's perfectly fine, right? Well, we should expect that. So yeah, that's. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.